So hello, welcome to our first micro conference. We have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about today. I'll introduce you as well to Veronica, who's chair of the Society for Music Production Research. We're going to try and do 90 minutes of as much excellent research and music production information as we can and keep it as tight as possible. The idea is to have 3 different micro conferences a year, each spaced with different times for time zones to make it as accessible as possible. This is the first. Introduce you to Veronica.
Hi, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Joe. So, before I send you the link, well, it's there on the screen as well, but the link for the conference, as Tim mentioned, even though these micro conferences are a bit of a new idea that we're working on in SMPR, we have, of course, had the past events. So I've just sent that link as well. At the bottom there, you can view the recordings for all of those that were really interesting and organized by the steering committee. So thanks to them. But the Victoria conference, thanks, Joe, for that link in the chat. We hope to see you all there. It's coming quite quickly. So the dates for that are the 11th to the 13th of September. Victoria, Canada, which I hear is very, very beautiful. So we've kind of seen some early drafts of what's happening thanks to Kirk. And it's looking really, really exciting. So we'd just like to really encourage you to register and engage with the past events. And back to Tim.
So we're going to go straight into it. Obviously, with the Society for Music Production Research. Be brilliant to have you on board. We have various memberships available. Please feel free to join us through the musicproductionresearch.org site. And we'll move straight on to our first event of the day. I'm extremely excited to be sharing this with you. Introducing you to Pascal de Mol, who is CEO of Set Mixer, ex-Spotify engineer, all kinds of amazing, interesting stuff. Really excited to be able to have Pascal talk to you about what they're up to in Set Mixer.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for all of you to have me here. I'm delighted. I'm the founder and CEO of Set Mixer, and Tim asked me to tell you a little bit about what we do, what we try to do, and of course, this is my favorite topic to talk about. So I'll try to keep it in 10 minutes. If you give me 10 hours, I would fill it. But yeah, as Tim said, my name is Pascal de Mol. I used to be at Spotify. I was one of the first people there, like one of the first 100. I did all the hardware partnerships there. So if you use Spotify in your car, your Sonos, your PlayStation, or your TV, then you've got me to blame for that experience. But one thing that happened at Spotify is like, we kind of transformed the music industry together. It was an amazing number of years that I spent there. But one thing that I kind of felt was missing is a very big part of the music industry for me, because as some other people here, I grew up with bootlegs. And I used to have a stack of cassettes in my room, and more than half of those cassettes were bootlegs. I just love listening to artists singing their hearts out in front of their fans. There's nothing better than that. But going into Spotify, I see like Spotify is a great distribution. Well, it's a perfect distribution method for music from record labels and from recording studios. But there are no bootlegs on Spotify, because bootlegs were never official. And so I started looking into, well, how can we solve that? Because I have a definite need to listen to this stuff. How can we get that organized? And I spoke to a lot of artists, and the answer is actually, nobody's recording. It's not just that there's no distribution, there's also no recording. We estimated there's about 7.5 million concerts happening. You speak to artists, all of them confirm, sometimes they have the evening of their life, everything worked, all the chemistry was there, and they walk off the stage and there's nothing left. And I think that's a shame. I think it's even more, I think it's almost criminal that kind of content is not captured. So that's where Set Mixer comes in. That's what we wanted to do. We basically want to turn every performance into a release. That's the whole mission of Set Mixer, recording everything so we don't miss any of these dual moments. And so what we've created is a system for recording and distributing of music. So what we have is an automatic recorder, which is completely home built. It connects to a mixing desk, a wide range of compatible mixing desks, and it records all the incoming channels of the mixing desk. So we don't record the front of house mix, we record the incoming channels in full multi-track. And then we have some AI-informed live filters. We don't call it mixes, because if you give a multi-track to a mixing engineer, and they spent a couple of days on it, you get a much better results. But what we have is we have a filter that gives something that the artist can release within 12 hours. And that speed, that's essential, because then you capture the kind of the concert high of the audience. The next morning, the audience can have that. And so in order to reach that audience that quickly within 12 hours, we also had to create our own distribution methods. So we also allow the artist to distribute straight to the audience using the SetMixer platform. So for venues, what that generates is like, well, if you have our recorder installed, you basically have a complete archive of every single show that happened at your venue at your fingertips at any time. You can just go back 2 years if you want to and listen to every single show. Plus, you make extra money out of these shows, and I will explain how. For the artists, it is an ultimate fan memento. It's for them, so the artists can listen to it, but they can also share this with their fans. And that's a really quick process. So they just upload a picture. The artist sets a price. We believe it's fundamental that the artist is in control. They set the price. They share a link. They keep their copyright. There's no lasting contract. They can withdraw it from sale whenever they want. They're totally in control. And when they create that link, they can share that with their fans. Fans click on the link and they can buy it with a simple Apple Pay double click or Google Pay or any other method. And really quickly get that content of the show that you just visited. So the next morning you could be listening to that same show. And if you shout it at the right time, it will be on that recording. And essential to the whole model is we feel that this needs to be fair. So we pay 70% back to the artist, which is more than any label pays them. So the artists actually make most of the money out of this, and there's no cost and no risk and no loss of copyright. So it's a completely new system that I think is the fair system that should be there. So our business model, as I said, we really believe in a fair remuneration. We share 70% of any income that we have from fans with the artist, but we also give 10% to the venues, because we really feel that the big problem in the grassroots industry is that these venues take the first punt on all these artists, like Ed Sheeran, Coldplay, even Adele went through grassroots venues first. And so these venues gave these artists a leg up at the time when they needed it. But then when these artists become massively successful, the venues don't get any of the upside. So we want to change that. If an artist releases it on SetMixer and somebody buys this or listens to it in 10 years from now, the venue still makes 10%. So we want to create an ecosystem where grassroots venues are remunerated for putting great artists on stage. But also there's a backup. Like if the artist doesn't like our automatic filter, they can also download the full multitrack and mix it themselves. And that is at a price that the venue sets. So the venue chooses what the cost of that is, and we share that revenue back 50-50 with the venue as well. So there's literally zero cost for venues, there's zero cost for artists, and we share most of our revenue back to the industry. So this is a model that is kind of unrivaled in the industry this way. And of course, I can share hundreds of reviews from venues who love what we're doing, and the same with artists. So where are we now? So we're serving a lot of venues. Our strategy is to kind of go into all these venues. These venues have hundreds of artists on stage every month. So if we are in 835 venues in the UK, which we are currently fully focused on, then we would have 35,000 set mixes every month for 340,000 artists, and that caters to 37 million ticket holders. There's more ticket holders in the UK than there are premium streaming subscribers. So this is a massive market that we're catering for. How are we doing so far? Well, we're doing pretty well, I think. We've got 44 venues so far. Those venues allowed us to record close to 10,000 individual shows that we have in our system right now. And we're working with 2,500 artists. But as you see on the graphs, these are kind of exponentially growing. We're signing up more and more artists, and we're delighting more and more artists every single day. And those artists give us full 4.8 star reviews on Google. You can Google SetMixer. There's always a few that complain about the placement of monitors or things that we have nothing to do with. So it's 4.8 and not 5, but it makes it a little bit more real. We're also recognized by the industry. Music Venue Trust is completely endorsing what we're doing. That's for international listeners. That's the organization that works on behalf of grassroots venues in the UK. So they have endorsed us to their membership. They think that what we're doing is a really great idea for grassroots venues. So why are we doing this now? I think this is a really important development right now, and that is for three major reasons. One is, well, live music is actually valued more than recorded music. What a lot of people in the industry don't realize is that live music has, for years and years, been bigger than recorded music. So in 2023, it was 33 billion for live, 28 for recorded. Also, discovery has moved away from streaming. Fans now, the newest generations, discover music through social media, not through streaming services. And so it's essential for the artists to have continuous feed of content. And what we're doing, we're actually giving them their music for free. So when they go on stage, they get their MP3 from us the next day. They are allowed to use that on social media completely free. Nobody has to be paid for that because it's good for us, it's good for the artist, and it's good for the venue. It's just promotion. And the final one is, well, everybody knows the problem with streaming payouts. 3% of the artists make 90% of the income on streaming. And I think Snoop Doggy Dogg just came out today with complaining about like how much money he makes out of his billion of streams. It just isn't good enough to pay £12 and get access to all the world's music. That just doesn't pay out. So we need to have a new model, and paying 70% to the artist for something that people actually pay for. That is a new model that may solve this. So we are where we are now. We are in a massive inflection point. We have the promotion of music venue trust. We have stable revenue from sharing multi-track sales, and very exciting. On Friday, we are launching our direct-to-fan platform. So from Friday, artists start publishing directly to fans. So we can't wait to see the result of that. We think this is going to be pretty big. And I wouldn't be a good founder if I wouldn't include a slide like this. So yeah, we are, as every startup, we're always fundraising. If anybody thinks that this story is worth telling to some people who may be interested, we're still looking for about 1 million in our current round. So I'm very, very happy to have people from the music industry support us. So please share my email address, which I have on this slide. It's just pascal@setmixer.com. Open to questions.
Thank you so much, Pascal. That's fantastic. Does anyone have any questions that they want to chime in on the mic for? I immediately got one to mind that I've got a thought, but if anyone wants to jump in, quite happy to yield the mic. I'll give it 3 seconds of awkward dead air. Paul jumped in there, 2.5. Crack
Tim,
on.
I've got a question.
Please ask away.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pascal. Thank you. This is a brilliant story. So what do you? So now you're asking for additional funding. What's the next sort of stage do you think is for your business?
So the next, we're completing the UK. We're very well on the way to complete the UK, and we've got enough funding to do that. But the next stage is then making it go international. So we already have requests from Europe, but we also want to go into the States. Once the model works in the UK, it's just a question of scaling it up. So we're currently proving the model, and then now we want to launch in other places. So it's just purely to fund growth.
Going.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Is anyone else having a question? Okay, I've got one that I wanted to ask. It was really interesting. I thought that you used the language AI-informed filter rather than mixer. What was the thoughts behind that, and how do you feel about potential copyright for AI mixing?
So we are really our principles are that we are artist first. We are here for innovation in music from the artist side. I'm really hesitant around the words AI. So we use AI to, for instance, figure out which instrument is on which channel. So simple things like that. But the AI actually never touches the music. So it informs us, but the mixing itself is not done by AI, because you don't know what an AI is going to do. It may throw all kinds of generative stuff into the music. We don't want that. This is real music of a real artist on stage singing their heart out in front of their fans. If you start auto-tuning their voices or doing all kinds of trickery, it's not real anymore. So we really don't want to have that. So that's why even that acronym AI, I'm uncomfortable with mentioning it, but you know, it is AI informed. And then on the part of filter, especially in an audience like this, yeah, you can call it mixing, but it is slightly different. The way that I look at it is kind of compare Instagram with professional photographers. You know, when Instagram came, you could easily snap family pictures and put a filter on it, and it looked okay, good enough to share. But if you would really put some effort into it and put it in Photoshop, you can do a much better job. And that's the same thing with our AI mixing, which, like, you can call it a filter. We create something that's good enough to share within 12 hours, right? And that speed is essential, so that people get out of their live show and they can very quickly access that music again. We don't want to wait a month. But if the artists want to download the multitrack and mix it by hand, which a lot of artists have by now done, and on Spotify you can find quite a few set mixes that artists have created out of our recordings. And also some artists that just couldn't afford to go into studio yet because they're early in their career, they've used our recordings to make their first releases, which I think is really exciting. But all of that is done like by hand. You take the multitrack, you mix it yourself. So there are kind of two things here. So calling it mixing is kind of a step too far. We don't want to compete with mixing engineers. It's not our aim to compete mixing engineers out of their business. No, what we're doing is we're creating a really quick mix so that the fans have something immediately the next day, and not something that, you know, you spend a week in a studio.
That's brilliant. Music to my ears, and it seems to reflect anything sort of truly innovative that doesn't actually take away, it adds more to the pie. So it's not,
that's it, right? These recordings otherwise wouldn't exist, right? So we're not competing, we're not cannibalizing any of the existing revenue streams. We're adding extra revenue from content that otherwise would not be recorded. So it's, by definition, it's just completely additive. Therefore also we feel like, you know, this is something that people want to buy. So it's kind of parallel to streaming. People will still pay their £12 to Spotify. But then if they want to go into the deeper back catalog of an artist, they will buy their set mixers. Just like people, I used to pay for bootlegs, and they were like, I don't know, like £30 each. Like, you were really, because you're a super fan, you're willing to pay for that. So I think this is an extra revenue stream for artists, which is really sorely needed.
Thank you, Pascal. That's fantastic. Much appreciated as well. I know I have a round of applause online. I'm going to give it a real round of applause. Thank you so much, Pascal. Great. So we'll move on to our next event. Our next event, we've got an interview with the excellent and esteemed Mike Cave, our owner of Loft Studios and mix engineer, master engineer to all kinds of stuff. I mean, the headlines, obviously, Lewis Capaldi, multi-platinum work, KRS-One, the Charlatans. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Steady. Thank you for joining us. Can you give everyone a super quick sort of potted history of where you came from in terms of what you do at university, where that led you, and maybe touch on some of the other studios that you worked on before getting to own the Loft?
Okay, so I guess I was one of the sort of last people to come through like the traditional route of production. So that involves sort of working in a commercial studio as a T-boy and then tape op, and just gradually working you through the ranks that way. And then I spent about best part of 10 years at Parr Street Studios in Liverpool, which at the time was a big facility. They had 2 big rooms in there, and lots of other studios. So we could do orchestras, we could do big mix sessions. We had SSL and Neve large format consoles. So it was a good facility. Probably, in fact, it was the biggest outside London. So we used to get some pretty big artists through there as well. So yeah, I started there just making lots of tea for people and watching and learning, and then just gradually work through that. And then I've been freelance now for over 10 years, nearly 15 years. And I wear 2 hats now, really. So I'm primarily a mix engineer, and I run Loft Mastering, which is a a mastering facility. So between the two, I'm sort of become more of like a finisher of records nowadays.
Is that the main source of work at the moment?
Yeah, that's pretty much all I do now. So I don't really produce anymore. It's literally just mixing and mastering. And I'm also doing quite a lot of mentoring as well, and which is something that I'm trying to push a little bit more. I can probably go into a bit more detail on that at some point, but I think it's pretty important to make sure that the sort of next generation of people coming into the industry get to experience at least some of what I did. So I think it'd be wrong for me to not share that, you know.
No, it's a great point. And you mentioned your route from going to T-Boy to, you know, that the old traditional route, which obviously a lot of us here are going to be educators as well. What you're saying about mentoring is really interesting. What do you think would be useful to replace that traditional route?
I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? It can't really be replaced, because I don't think there's anything better than watching a producer make a record with a band and or with an artist. It's like all the things. I learned a lot about how not to do things as well. You know, it wasn't all plain sailing, but the problem we've got now is that people are trying to get into the music industry as engineers and producers, and they're not getting those opportunities to watch how to make records. So it's basically like the Wild West. You know, people are just trying to glean what they can from YouTube tutorials and courses here and there. But and you know, if we're not careful, I think that it's going to become a bit of a dying art. Really, I think it already has to an extent. So you know, anyone that's in the same situation as me, I think, has sort of almost got like a responsibility to try and share as much of that skill set and experience as possible, you know.
In fact, I meant to ask you, are there any particular tunes, and I was putting you on the spot here, sorry, are there any particular tunes that you got most from as when you were learning, when you were coming up? Were any particular tunes and any particular elements of those tunes that you thought, wow, that's fantastic, that's a real game changer of production? I'm just thinking might be interesting to chuck some audio on.
Are you talking about production that I've been involved with? Or?
Either anything you've shadowed, watched, or you know, as T-Boy, or anything you've been involved with, and anything that you've found to be.
Yeah, rather than being specific about a track, I think it's worth a mention about Ken Nelson, who was my mentor. So Ken Nelson's an incredible producer and engineer who was working at Parr Street as well. He was there before me, and I sort of learned alongside him. I think he did all the Coldplay records, and he ended up doing some incredibly big records. And then unfortunately, we lost him out of Parr Street then because he was off doing those things. But at the time, I think, you know, I could sit with him for 20 minutes and there'd be like a couple of light bulb moments that I just wouldn't have got otherwise. So, you know, everything from arrangements and, you know, creating shape in songs. Because a lot of the time when you listen to people's demos, I see the same issues all the time. So often like a lack of shape in terms of the journey of the song. So things can be like quite linear, and also lack of depth. So, you know, panning is easy. We can put something on the left or the right, but we can't just get a button and go, oh, can I put that at the back? And can I put this at the front? So the sort of tricks we use to try and create that dimension, that sort of third dimension of depth. I learned a lot about that as well in terms of like early reflections and different effects to create that illusion. So yeah, there was a lot to learn, but I think rather than mentioning songs, I think it's people, and Ken for me was that person. You know, he's really, really helpful.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So then moving into the loft, what were the first sort of major recordings and the first more interesting stuff that you've done that you can relate to, were probably most important to you?
So the loft it came out of basically when I left Parr Street. I was in house at Parr Street, but I also had a studio in Parr Street as well for doing lots of programming and Pro Tools editing, stuff like that. So when I left Parr Street, I needed another space to just be able to do those things like overdubs, editing. And that's really what it was supposed to be initially. But I think as things have evolved and equipment has become more powerful and better quality and smaller, the place is just built into like a self-sufficient space really, where we can do everything here. So yeah, it just evolved. And I think probably the pivotal artist for me in terms of like that transition was the Charlatans. So they came into Parr Street and we did a record with them there. And you know, my policy as a tape op or an assistant was always to try and make sure that every person I worked with asked for me specifically when they next came in. So that's basically what happened with the Charlatans, but they wanted to do the next record at their studio. So, you know, the way that it was structured, there's no way I could have left Parr Street for 2 months and then just got my job back. So it almost like forced me to leave and become freelance. So, and they were really supportive, to be honest. And their manager, Steve Harrison, was great. And he had a few other bands that he kept me busy with. So that transition was made like really smooth by the Charlatans and their team around it, really.
That's good. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Just putting up some pictures for those. So the entrepreneurial side of things, would you say that's as important, more important? How would you balance that with the other skills, the other hard skills of being a mix and mastering engineer?
Do you know what? I've always said like 90% of it is people skills, because, you know, we had at Parr Street, we had some incredible engineers coming through the doors, but if it was someone that couldn't really get on with anyone, or was just grumpy or awkward, or, you know, no one wanted to work with them. So I think I learned that quite quickly, is that, you know, if you can get the people skills right, then you can learn the rest on the job. Do you know what I mean? So it was all about trying to make people comfortable, and this is another thing Ken showed me about, like, it's not really about the technical until you've got a great song and a great performance. So, you know, we could be the most technical, incredible mixers. If the song's not there and the performances on that song are not right, then the mix isn't going to be right. So I think, you know, Ken told me a lot about like how to make people comfortable to get the best out of them and get the best performances. And then the rest is easy, really. I say easier, because I think we've all been in that situation where we've been sent something to mix, and it doesn't matter what we do to it, we just cannot get it to sound like a record. And I think intrinsically, it's not what we're doing; it's what we've been given. So yeah, I think it's just keep that in mind with everything, and also keep that in mind with what you say yes to, basically. I mean, nowadays I won't agree to mix anything until I've heard the full multi-track, the raw multi-track, and work out and also have conversations about reference points and the vision that the client has for the record, and make sure that it's in line with what is actually possible. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what I do to it, no one's going to be happy, and I'm not going to want to put my name to it. So yeah, I approach everything with caution really nowadays, and make sure that I can actually deliver something great, you know.
No, that's great. Are there any particular examples? I'm going to press you because it'd be cool to have some audio underneath us, of a song that you've done that tells that sort of.
Oh, I tell you. Okay, so in terms of performance and song, Lewis Capaldi, Lost on You, and only because it's so bare, and I think that it's a good example of like why there's a misconception, I think, with simple acoustic tracks, that they're easy to mix. I often get this thing from labels where they say, "Oh, we're doing a full album. We've only got these two. It's a piano and vocal. You know, we can you do us a deal on that, because it'll take you 5 minutes." You know, but I find those records harder to mix than big pop records, because there's nowhere to hide. So, you know, you've got, if the performance and the emotion in the performance isn't there, it's not going to draw you in if there's just a piano and a vocal. So I think that Lewis track is a good one, because it's so raw. There's like a vocal, a piano, and actually no effects or anything. So it's totally reliant on his performance.
For YouTube copyright purposes, we've muted the audio here, but the song to go and find is Lost on You by Lewis Capaldi. Listen out for the particularly dry vocal.
Thank you, Joe. That's great. Mike, you've mentioned the Wild West of the music industry. It'd be brilliant to get you to expand a little bit more on, this is in conversations that we've had about this. It'd be great to hear what your thoughts are about that and what specifically you meant and solutions to that.
So, I mean, in many areas of the music industry, it's the Wild West because the control is now open to, you know, an artist can go from 0 to release without any help if they don't want it. But I think what I meant, I think when we've had conversations about this is that in terms of the quality control and the actual skill set of people recording, is no one's showing people how to do things. They're just winging it. And you can hear it in the recordings and you can hear it in the arrangements of the songs. And, you know, it makes a mixer's job a lot more challenging, really. We've got, you know, some of the bigger sort of pop mixers can take, you know, a couple of days to put together, but day one is literally just fixing issues and trying to make some sense of the sonics. You know, at the same time, we've got one of the biggest issues, I think, is that, you know, digital audio is intrinsically unforgiving, you know, so it's like whatever you put into it, you get the same out. And with a lot of these sort of cheaper Chinese condenser microphones and a lot of the plugins that a lot of plugin manufacturers want to like hype their sound so that everyone thinks it's impressive. So everything's getting brighter and louder and harsher. So there's a lot of surgery to do at the mix stage to try and sort of fix all these issues. And we just didn't used to get that when we were working on tape. You know, everything was a lot simpler. You know, most recording studios had, you know, nice German mics and ribbon mics and things like that. And yeah, everything seemed just a lot simpler to mix. And, you know, the bar's higher now. You know, if you listen to, you know, the heavyweight mixers now pushing out, you know, incredible mixes that we've got to compete with, and it takes time. It takes time and effort and to keep up, you know. I think years ago, if we listened to like mixes from the 90s, you know, they're good and they make sense, but they're just not on the same level as what we can achieve now. So yeah, as I say, there's still great engineers out there, but there's just fewer of them, and there's a lot of people just trying to make it work. You know, producers and artists in their bedrooms, capturing things on cheap equipment, and it just makes for more work for us, really.
So last question from me before I open up the floor to anyone else. What are your favorite or most useful techniques for dealing with these issues? What are the kind of corrective techniques that you were talking about?
I mean, thankfully, you know, the technology is sort of causing some of the issues, but there's technology there to resolve the same issues. So thank God we have got solutions to these problems. But you know, and all these sort of plugins like Soothe and Spiff, the company called Oak Sound who make these plugins, they're designed specifically for these issues that I'm talking about, to resolve harshness and anything that's too brittle that before we just wouldn't have been able to do. So those type of plugins really are a savior. Without them, we would definitely be struggling. Yeah.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Well, we've come to the Q&A section. I know that there's one from Joe. So if I'll open up, Joe, do you want to ask a question to Mike, and who else can think about that? We've got 4 or so minutes before we jump in.
Yeah, being a musicologist, I can't hear a mix without wanting to know how it was built. On the Lewis Capaldi track that you played there, an incredibly dry mix and sounded very close mic'd. That kind of creative decision on how to build the sound world, does that come from you, the artist, a conversation? How does that work?
It actually came from Lewis's team. So Lewis is very much about, he just wants to perform. So whether that's at a gig or, you know, do a vocal take in the studio. Beyond that, he doesn't seem as he sort of hands over the responsibility of the details to his management and his label. So Lewis is happy as long as his performance is there. He's happy. But yeah, it was one of those situations where mix 1 had some reverb on it. Then they were like, "Can we have less reverb?" Mix 2's less. Mix 3, can we have a bit less? And then it's like, let's just get rid of the reverb and just see how that works. So, and you know, it's a bold move because it's such a common thing we do, isn't it? We get a vocal up and we put some reverb on it, you know. So I just find that it doesn't work very well unless the vocal performance is really engaging. And I think in that case he could carry it, you know. It was like he's singing in your ear. That was the idea, really. But not all vocal performances can handle that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really handy. I mean, it's a super geeky question. Do you remember what the mic it was?
I didn't record the vocal.
Oh, of course not. You were mixing it.
I mixed the record, yeah. So I'm trying to think if anyone ever told me what it was. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's got issues, that vocal recording. It breaks up. Because he can belt out when he wants to, and there is moments in that song where the mic actually breaks up. So, but again, you know, the performance carries it, and this is why I always say, like, some of my favorite records are not perfect sonically. Like, you know, they've got issues with them. There's tuning issues. But the performance is so emotive. That's what music should be about, isn't it? It's like how it makes you feel, and I'd much rather have something that's breaking up that's special than something that's sonically perfect and just lacks vibe. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you. Any other questions? I've got one in that back pocket. Oh yeah, Lachlan, please.
I've got a question. So, Mike, you were talking about how you've got this kind of stringent vetting process where you kind of like to hear the multi-track beforehand.
Yeah.
But then you're also talking about how you might be spending 3 days on a pop track. Does that mean that some tracks you might even hear the multi-track and know there's going to be a bit of work? You can hear the Chinese microphones cranking away,
Yeah.
but the songs just win you over and you're like, okay, I'm prepared to do the work on this one?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think because people's rough mixes can be a little bit misleading. Sometimes you think, oh, actually, you know, this is in good shape. And then you get the multi-track and it's like, oh, hang on a minute, there's a lot of work here. So, I mean, I don't tend to have like a fixed mix rate. So everything's bespoke. So it's all about like, okay, let's hear what you've got. Let's speak about where you want to get to. And then I can then work out, okay, what work is involved to get you from where you are to deliver something really special. And then that will then allow me to go, okay, well, you know what? It might be a quick mix, or it might be something that's like needs a bit of additional production. And then we can talk about, do you want me to do that? Or do you want to take it away and do some more? Or so I just find that it's a better way of working. And then there's no surprises later for the label, or if the artist is independent. I don't really want to go back to them and go, you know what, I need a bigger fee because there's more work involved than I thought. So I just like to know what I'm getting involved with before I start, really.
Sounds very wise. So sorry, I'll shut up in a minute, but like, yeah, I do find it very interesting how the artist or the tracking session will come back with such an excellent mix, and they've spent ages trying to mix it, and then they give it to you. They know it's not quite there, but you're kind of adding, I guess, in the overall project, you're kind of adding less because they've got it 85% there, and they just want you to do that last little bit.
Yeah. I mean, what can also be really challenging is, that term demoitis, when people have been listening to a rough mix for so long, they get an attachment to it. So I think that's the sort of period we're in now. I've never known demoitis to be as much of an issue as it is now. People are so attached to things, and actually it can stop us making great records because people sometimes won't allow you to, even just in terms of translation, just to allow you to create a mix that works on lots of different systems, which is what our job is, really. But I'm finding some artists, particularly artists that are unmanaged and independent, so they've got no guidance and they're just tied to a certain thing, but they're giving you references of something that I know how to get to, but they're not allowing me to get there. So that's another reason why I say about the Wild West. It's like people are not being guided in the right way, you know.
Thank you, Mike. That's brilliant. I mean, another super quiet round of applause. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
We'll have to have retroactively one for Pascal as well. Thank you very much. Moving on to research papers, the next one of which is Cherie from Water and Music. Who's going to talk about AI attribution, music attribution. So I'll hand you over to Cherie.
Thank you so much, Tim. And hi, everyone. It's been really great to listen in on today's talks and presentations. It's a very good mix of kind of more the artistic creative side and also the industry side. The set mixer presentation was super interesting. That is definitely like the area I sit kind of at the intersection of all those places. So as a brief introduction, I'm Cherie Hu. I'm the founder of Water and Music, which is a music and tech research and consulting firm. I have been running it full-time for the last 5 years, and prior to that was a freelance analyst for the likes of Billboard, Music Business Worldwide, Forbes, Variety, and many other publications. Over the past decade, I've just been really interested in how technology is impacting the entire value chain of music, from not just creation and production, but also to how it's distributed, monetized, and then experienced by consumers and fans. So obviously AI is impacting the entire kind of spectrum of that chain. And I think we're also in a really interesting time right now where I would argue that the state-of-the-art generative music AI models are making music that is on par with what humans can make. We can definitely debate that or kind of talk about that in the chat maybe at a later point, but I think in terms of quality, we're at that point now. So across the industry, I think the next question is, how do we actually make money from that? What happens to all the artists, producers, songwriters, creators who are already, you can stay on the second slide, thank you, who are, who made all the music that is training these models? Is there any opportunity for credit and compensation when their work is used to train AI models, and then when that output is then monetized, generating hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of streams or views? So this presentation is also, I should mention, you can treat it as like a preview of a much, much deeper report that we published on Water and Music. It's already on our website. It was published last month on music AI attribution and kind of how it really works on a technical level. I won't go too deep into the technicalities today. I'll kind of focus on some high-level fundamental truths or questions around this space. So this is the main question to keep in mind in terms of why we're talking about it. It's about this question of who deserves credit and compensation when AI generates music. Next slide. So today I'm going to, again, do a very quick speed run of the structure of our report. So attribution, which I'll define on the next slide, is kind of the underpinning concept that enables credit and compensation in an AI world for music. Myself and my research team kind of went through some very fundamental questions. What is attribution? What are we actually attributing from the training data? How does it work on a technical level? Who are the main players in this space? And then what does this all mean for the music industry, from individual creators, artists, producers, to bigger rights organizations as well? Next slide. So in terms of how we define attribution, I think it helps also by comparing it to what it is not. So with things like Content ID on YouTube, which probably many of you are familiar with, that is what I would call similarity search. So, you're kind of it involves fingerprinting a lot of the time. You take, one song or sample, compare it to another song or sample, and see on the output level, how similar the two are. If they're super similar or maybe identical, that, kind of leads down the whole content ID chain of placing a claim, claiming something is infringing, etc. Attribution goes much deeper into understanding, in the context of AI, the actual internal mechanics of how the AI model works. So unlike something like similarity search or deepfake detection that is just looking at comparing outputs and how similar or identical they are, attribution is actually trying to causally link outputs back to the specific training inputs that influence them. So the ideal, I think, for the music industry is that if, say, ChatGPT has a music generator at some point in the future, generates a song, and then the output is like a royalty sheet with the splits of each individual pieces of training data that influence that output, maybe even with kind of percentages of influence. So when we talk about attribution, we're kind of talking about that internal level of influence, not just comparing outputs. Next. What makes this topic really complicated, and I think also a very important fundamental truth to address here, is that generative AI is not the same as sampling. It is a lot more complicated. And maybe this is already like a widely known thing, but I think it's worth visualizing why it's so different. So traditional sampling, again, is just taking fragments from existing recordings and manipulating them in some way. Like the funky drummer, iconic drum break, kind of that's a very recognizable sample across, at this point, hundreds of songs. In contrast, AI models are not directly taking fragments from training data and copying them in outputs. They are absorbing, rather, these aesthetic and musical concepts on a much more abstract level. And they learn patterns and concepts rather than merely copying sections. So I think a good example with songwriting is it might learn the concept of a 1-5-6-4 chord progression. Hopefully that makes sense to this audience. Obviously, there's so many songs that use that concept. You can't, and if we tried to equally attribute it to all the songs that include that chord progression, you would have probably hundreds of thousands of tracks, and it wouldn't be practical, and it's not really like, and it's a high level concept at the end of the day, and not something that any one particular creator owns, so to speak. So, and they're kind of learning these concepts, and it's captured, as this image on the right shows, across these multi-layered architectures. This is what the core of deep learning is all about. So a single AI-generated track from some music generator like Suno will draw from dozens of different abstract layers of influence. So this image already is very complicated and is still an oversimplification of what is actually happening under these models. And there's been millions of dollars poured into this field of research, and people still haven't fully figured it out in terms of how to actually interpret and explain what's happening internally. Next. Now for the question on what we can attribute. I think this is another layer of complexity on top of just the core model architecture of how AI models work. So in the music industry, the default that we think of is you can attribute the composition of the underlying training data. You can attribute the recording. And actually, a lot of AI models are trained on recording, so they don't actually have the composition information. And so a lot of songwriters, I think, are arguably kind of left out of a lot of the training data conversations that are happening right now. But beyond just the music, beyond just the audio, there's so many other inputs. There's the prompt. I think the US Copyright Office technically has declared that if you prompt something like a Suno and just take that song that is generated as the output, that is not copyrightable. But undeniably, the user had some creative influence over the output through the prompt. So should they be attributed as well? Yeah, I won't go into kind of other like sources or other techniques that also might muddy that influence. But attribution is so complicated. AI models are so complicated that all the solutions that are out there right now ultimately make a trade-off and a value judgment about which of these elements do or don't deserve compensation. So the example of like AI models that primarily train on recordings, their attribution tech is mainly attributing to the recording side and not to the composition side, just because they don't have that data a lot of the time. So just also keeping that in mind, like these technical limitations are shaping ultimately how value is going to flow through the system. Next. Yeah, I won't go through these in too much detail. I can also probably distribute this report to this group after the fact if there's any interest. But we scanned like dozens of academic papers on attribution, primarily from the LLM world, where I think there's the most activity in this space. There isn't as much yet in audio, but I think that will change very soon. And pulled out these three main techniques. One is called an influence function. The concept of like a line of best fit, I think, is the most simplified illustration of this in terms of, you know, understanding how does taking a certain data point out of the training data change the model output. I think it's super limited because it's really sensitive to outliers. And if you try to implement that at scale, if you're training on, you know, terabytes of data, it's just not practical to really go with that. Embeddings may be familiar to some more technical people in this group. It's kind of mapping and compressing audio data into numerical coordinates. It's also very limited because it doesn't really show causation or direct influence. It only kind of clusters similar audio based on the output in kind of a cluster of space. And then watermarking, which is already very popular in music, that kind of takes these detectable tags from training data. It could be metadata. This screenshot is very notorious from the Doom video game soundtrack. For one of their songs, they embedded this like 666 watermark in their music, which is kind of very humorous on theme. But again, also very limited because it's just showing that the training data was in the output. It doesn't actually show the degree of influence. So general takeaway from this slide is that the perfect attribution system does not exist. And I think any conversation around compensation and credit in a music AI world has to start from this point. Even with the state-of-the-art AI models, it's still very limited in what they can do. Next, how am I doing on time? Do I have like 1 minute, 2 minutes?
The last minute, yeah, please.
Last minute, okay. I'll be very quick. So yeah, there are several startups that are acting as brokers essentially between rights holders and developers to close this new generation of licensing deals. These are definitely the companies to know about. I would call out Surreal as one of the only companies that I believe has a public patent around attribution and measuring influence. So I would definitely recommend looking into them. We link to the patent in our report as well. And if you go to the next slide, which should be one of the final slides, just some like strategic takeaways for the industry. Even though perfect attribution doesn't currently exist, also one phrase that I've been throwing around is that the perfect attribution system is the one that the industry will agree to use. Like if you have perfect attribution, but it's really cumbersome or impractical to implement, or not everyone in the industry thinks that it is fair, I think that, you know, it's kind of useless practically at that point. So there's a big like market coordination problem in terms of getting all the rights holders to agree to use these emerging systems. And because of that, artists, producers, creators that own all of their rights actually have a huge advantage when it comes to licensing deals. And so a lot of the artists that we're seeing actually like earn revenue from these deals are fully independent, own all of their rights, are kind of running their own ship. So just, I guess, keeping that in mind in terms of like who has the most leverage in this world. I will stop there because I know that I think I'm at time. But yeah, thanks for thanks for listening to my talk. Thank you to everyone here for having me. And yeah, I believe our report was linked in the chat, but I'm happy to send a PDF as well to everyone here.
Thank you, Cherie. That's excellent. We have time for a quick 1 minute for questions. Has anyone got any questions for Cherie regarding that? If we go back to the gallery, maybe.
I guess I've got kind of, which is I see as the main kind of philosophical question. You're talking about how to attribute music made by AI, but I guess my question, I'm really curious to hear your answer on this one, is kind of why should AI make music in the first instance?
Why should AI make music in the first instance? I would respond to that by saying that AI is not autonomously making music. It's a human that is prompting an AI to make a song. And if you look at all of these people who, like, I would say in 99% of cases, people are using these like AI apps like Suno and Udio to express themselves. Like, they're using them to make memes. So they're using them to connect with other people. Obviously, there's still a huge legal question on whether like the legality of the model and how it was trained on, like whether that's legal, but AI is not autonomously making music. People are compelled to make a song. So I think I would kind of respond to that by saying, why do people make music? They make music to express themselves because they want to say something. And then obviously there's a question of whether AI is the most ethical way for a human to do that. But yeah, still another question. Thank you.
And a real quick one from me, just which is because I'm interested in melody and top line, which is obviously the domain of the musical work, not the sound recording in copyright terms. So YouTube Content ID picks up cover versions, presumably by scanning for top line melody. As far as I know, there's no publicly available API that will do that. It's all proprietary, and basically only Google owns the top line melody catalog. Do you see that as changing? Is there an emergent interest in melodic dictation, melodic AI attribution detection, because that's where most of the lawsuits are historically?
Definitely. You might know of a company called Audible Magic. They also they're kind of a third party that partners with companies on similar content ID fingerprinting technology. They have integrations with Suno and Stable Audio and a lot of the big music AI generators. Sorry. It is limited in scope though. So they only scan. So for all of those applications, users can upload their own audio files as inspiration for the output. And if they upload copyrighted music in that step, Audible Magic will shut it down on those apps. So there is some protection that is already happening, I think. And I think there's more momentum around that with all the lawsuits happening. In terms of taking the output and like trying to see whether this is a cover of an existing song, I don't know if Audible Magic is looking into that, but yeah, that's definitely more green territory, I think.
Thank you. I've posted a link for Audible Magic in the chat. Thanks, Cherie.
Thank you so much. That's great. Well, we'll move swiftly on to our final research paper before we get to the collab session, which we'll jump into, eat into a little bit before we get to the plenary. Dr. Mike Exarchos.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. Let's talk a little bit about hip-hop ontology and metamodernism. Sample-based hip-hop have been created out of the recontextualization of past phonographic records. It represents a creative response to socioeconomic crisis, initially via the vehicle of turntablism, and later on via innovative production approaches that are evolving sampling technologies. Its music-making paradigm challenged established ideas about intellectual ownership, and as the music ecosystem played catch-up, sample-based practitioners continued varying their approach in response to an ever-tightening licensing landscapes. And one of the creative mutations that still resonates loudly today, having become more commonplace in the early 90s, involves the creation of original sampling content by the sample-based producers themselves. But this approach brings to question the sonic materiality of samples and the manifestation of an invented sonic past in their sonic signatures. At the center of all this is the issue of retro signifiers, something that we are quite obsessed in Western society, and we have been for a few decades. There's a couple of different ways of looking at that. The postmodern way of looking at it is that we're using nostalgia. It's a postmodern sort of reading. And a more meta-modern way of looking at it is that we are being ontological. We use nostalgia in a more complex way to try and create some commentary, really. So the concepts of nostalgia and ontology are both legitimate concepts within remix culture, and they're used to comment on the present, the future, and the past. But the difference is that the use of nostalgia uses, in a more cynical way, the aesthetics of the recognizable past for artistic and commercial reasons, whilst ontology tends to have a more multi-layered or complex critique. It uses the unrecognizable past, or past that hasn't even happened, to critically deconstruct cultural memory, so as to do what Mark Fisher calls a reconstruction of temporal disjunctions. And the musicians and the artists that use it tend to bring to light the failure of the future or a lost future, particularly under neoliberal capitalist societies. Where does metamodernism come in? Metamodernism is sort of the aesthetic or the structure of our times. It tends to favor synthesis more than dialectics. It tends to favor the generative paradox, this idea that there is meaning in combining impossibles together. And there's a both-and oscillation. People move very fast between modernism, postmodernism, big utopias, and cynicism as a way to try and create some commentary. And this is an act of meaningful construction rather than anarchic deconstruction. And it's really all under this tag of remix culture, remix aesthetics. Mark Fisher gives us some good commentary on this. Most of the artists that are preoccupied with technology as material as memory favor a particular sonic signature in ontology. Let me know if you can hear this. The crackle and speakers are good, fantastic. And beyond just crackle, which is a surface characteristic, there's also this idea, this oscillation between analog and digital and the sonic signatures they create. I'll play one example out of these three, which are pretty telling. Here's one from Burial. So Burial actually didn't live through rave culture. He listened to that music through his older brother. So he created a sort of post-apocalyptic dystopian rave based on what he imagined, what he missed. A lot of these artists use both spatial and textual signatures in the way they produce the music to invoke a sense of time and a sense of space. To use Michael Pickering's definitions, he comes up with the term elsewhen instead of elsewhere, which is about the temporal distance brought about by recorded music. Michael Holland, in a particular paper on the ARP conference in the past, talked about how multiple reverberant signatures in the staging of the track, something that Mike mentioned earlier as a sort of shape of the track, can sort of communicate diachronic contrast. That's something that in sample-based hip-hop happens a lot faster because of the chopping of full masters within the track, as I'll demonstrate in the praxis of the track. And we'll fast forward to a Griselda Records tuned by Westside Gun straight away, where we'll get this sort of ontology on steroids in terms of a sample-based hip-hop track. Here we go. It's the third track I'll play you.
Conductor.
Stovey's home, I spent keys to gold, saran wrap on the floor, been ripping them like Bruce Bowen. My young boy got the pole.
I think you get the idea. So I'll take you to an unreleased line, plug from the next album. And the reason for it is because it's quite ontological in its content. It translates roughly to Apocalypse Blues from Greek. And the next half of the presentation will be mainly audio, and I'll have some quotes instead of talking over the audio to respect the practice-based nature of the research and save some time too. So the context is out of a PhD, out of a book, out of a 4.5-hour instrumental album, which was based on sample creation over the past 6 years. And the source content was created with sort of historic sonic signatures in mind. I'll take you straight through to some of the sample examples. Here's sample 1. This is from an ambient electronic synth gamelan piano and various other keyboards instrumental. This comes from an industrial electronica segment that I produced with a vocal sample. And off to the third foundational layer here, courtesy of Paul Thompson on the drums. He's my funky drummer. He's in the audience today. All right, and let's see how they fit in the mix. And again, I'll use the quotes to do some commentary without speaking.
Μηχανές, κενό και σκοτάδι. Άτομα μόρια, μια Μητρόπολη στον Άρη. Συχνότητες ξεκούρτιστες, μια παύση απ' τον Άδη. Η ύπαρξη μας τίποτα, μια ανάσα πάμε πάλι. Δεινόσαυροι και σάπιεν στον κύκλο πεντοζάλι. Στο χώρο χρόνο παίξαμε πολλές φορές στο ζάρι. Και τώρα ως αστερόσκονοι χορεύουμε στη ζάλη. Στοιχεία στροβιλιζόμενα, βερβίσιδες σε πλανήτες. Με ήττες ξεχασμένες στην ταχύτητα της γραμμικής μας μνήμης, θύμα κυκλικής βαρύτητας. Μα άτιμος αλγόριθμος ήτανε προβλεπόμενος. Πολίτης μη σε άρνηση, ποιος θα είναι ο επόμενος. Μετά ηχό από όσα είπες. Διάλογος παράλογος, τροχιά προς μαύρες τρύπες. Το τέλος φανερώνει όσα μείνανε ανίποτα. Ψιθυρία φαία των σκιών μπροστά στο τίποτα. Απρόσμενοι αλήθινες αγάπες κλείνουνε απότομα του βαγονιού οι πόρτες. Τώρα βλέπεις καθαρά πολλαπλών ζώων απάτες. Αρμονία των σφαιρών όπως λιώνουνε οι νότες. Κι έτσι φεύγω διαπλανήτικα, πίσω μου συντριμμιά. Ψυχών από μινάρια αιωρούνται στη στρατόσφαιρα. Ο παράδεισος μακριά, η βάση Πειραιά. Άλλος ένας μπάμπης που το πνίγει η ατμόσφαιρα. Δεν σ' αφήνω από τα μάτια μου, στερνή μου οάση. Τι να μας κάνει νύχτα, παρέχει αναγνώριση κι ας μοιάζει η αποκάλυψη με κόλαση. Εκεί μας πήγε η μουσική, πάθος δίχως ενόραση. Αδιάφορο και σ' όποιον αρέσει. Απόλυτη τιμή, απλά ζωή και ούτε λέξη. Πλέον δεν ακούγεται μέσα στην αντίλη. Τα ηχητικά μας κύματα σβήσαν όπως οι ήλιοι. Λέξη δεν ακούγεται μέσα
Thanks, Mike. That's great. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Okay, I have a quick one. How do you think hauntology relates to, I suppose, AI attribution, but AI prompts and the complexity of, let's say, an AI creation system?
AI creation system.
Yeah, generative. Sorry.
I was
big
thinking a lot
bogey.
about that during the previous paper, actually, which I found really interesting. I think that there's a lot of formulaic music being made by songwriters or by teams of songwriters anyway. You can probably tell I'm a bit anti-pop by the kind of music I'm making anyway. And I think every time we have tools that help us make more formulaic music, and I mean that not because they don't eventually get used in a very creative way, but initially when we discover a toy, we tend to make simple, fast things, right? And they tend to be about reading the parameters of the past and to create something, an AI generator make me a Johnny Cash song. Johnny Cash, the way he put the parameters together to sound only like Johnny Cash at the time he was alive, even though he used parameters from the past, did it in a humane way that made it sound like nothing else. So I think that partly some of the reactions we get from artists whenever music starts sounding more samey or more formulaic is really exciting. I think that we're probably going to have a reaction of more critical commentary through sonic signatures, whether that means more lo-fi, more extreme, more angry, more dirty, and so forth, less pristine. I mean, there's already, boom bap being quite an old, sample-based hip hop being quite an old style of music already. The resurgence that's happening now, like the track I played you from West Side Gun and Griselda Records, they've actually removed the beats. They went down to a sort of almost avant-garde sample-based aesthetic because they're trying not to be commercial trap sounding, but they're also trying not to be old school sounding. So I think we'll hear a reaction from artists in the face of formulaic synthesis.
Thank you, Mike. That's really cool. Okay, for our last session before we wrap up to the plenary, please, we're going to invite you to jump in. We're going to try to make use of the synchronous, collaborative nature of this 2D landscape that we find ourselves in and trying to leverage the benefits of it in a collaborative sheet. Because what you don't tend to get in the physical world is you can't all speak at once for fairly obvious reasons. However, you might all be able to speak at once at the same time in our collaborative document that Joe has very kindly put together for us. And he's just firing up the link to that right now. And if we can make use of this link, that'd be great. And if you could jump onto our shared whiteboard, there's the link also in the chat, which I'm just about to make use of. We can jump in there. Joe and I have already made a start and loads. Oh, I see. This is fantastic. This is great. We've got loads going on here. Any other points that anyone wants to finish before we wrap it up?
Can I just add, I saw a little comment on the document about classical music at SMPR, and I wanted to just remind everyone that for us, we care about music that comes out of a speaker. We don't care what type of music it is. So we encourage everyone to get involved with whatever it is.
A plug-in, although I've plugged it quite a lot on that shared document for the Journal of Music Production Research. So if anybody is carrying out cool, interesting research, we've got our first inaugural edition, which will be published in September, October, but we will be receiving submissions for the next edition. From this point onwards, I would recommend that you submit anything probably from about September or October to just allow for some administrative time. And that second edition should probably come out, I guess, around autumn of 2026. Fantastic.
Thank you, Austin. I will say thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Another excellent event. Let's get another round of applause for all.